going to be starting a series, albeit maybe very brief series, 2 parts, 3 parts. We will see what the Lord has us to do, but we're going to be dealing with the subject, which really boils down to one word, and that one word is choices. Somebody say choices. In this series, do understand that this series at times may step on your toes. This series may, in fact, ruffle some feathers. This series at times may rock some boats, but it's necessary because we all need to be accountable for and we need to own up to our choices. So let's deal with that word choose, that word choice, because in order to understand what God is going to speak to us in this series, we need to know what that word means. To choose is to select from a number of possibilities. When you choose, you pick by preference. All you got to do is go with someone that goes shopping and they have a particular preference when it comes to products. Some just will not wash dishes unless it has a certain brand, or it will not enter into their house. They pick that brand of dish liquid because that's what they prefer. Some people will not, and they cannot buy any other type of milk unless it's the particular brand that they prefer, because they understand and they're used to that brand, and so they always choose that brand. Somebody say choice. To choose is to prefer or decide to do something. When you choose, you want. When you choose, you desire. This one I really like. To choose is to select freely and after consideration. After you put some thought in, then that's when you make your choice. We all, in the course of a day, just in the course of a day, y'all, we all can sometimes make hundreds of choices. Every day you and I are alive is a day filled with choices. I know there are days where every day, really, I choose what I'm going to wear. Every day I have to choose, at least for me, because every day at 12 noon, my wife will tell you that is lunchtime for me. So I choose what I'm going to eat for lunch every day at 12 noon like clockwork. Even the route that you go to work, you must make a choice in order to determine how you're going to get to work that day. Now, let's be real. Some choices are easy. But then there's some choices that are not that easy. Some choices, y'all, people of God, some choices will only impact that day that you're in. But some choices, if we're not careful, can not only impact that day, but can impact you for the rest of your life. That's why you have to be careful about the choices that you make. It's going to be necessary for us to understand why choices are important so that we can understand why some of us are where we are in our lives. If you look now with me at Deuteronomy 30, verse 15, God is speaking here, and he clearly says, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil." I find it rather interesting now. Who is it that's telling us that he's putting these choices before us? It's God, right? He says, "I have set today before you life and good, death and evil." But now when you go to verse 19, again, he says, "I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live." Again, as we can see, who puts the choices before us? God does. Yet notice what God says here, "Therefore choose life." I find it interesting that notice, and if hopefully you can see this, notice what God does not say. God does not say, "I have made the choice for you." No, 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 no. God says, "I have put these choices before you, but you must make the choice for yourself." We often teach this, but I think we need to be reminded of this quite often. God does not force you to do anything. God, let me say that again. God does not force you to do anything. God does not force you to love him. God does not force you to surrender to him. God does not force you to serve him. God has never forced anybody to obey him. God does not even force you to follow him. God does not force you to believe in him. He leaves it up to you and I to make the choice whether or not we want to choose him. You have to choose for yourself whether or not you're going to serve him. You have to choose for yourself whether or not you're going to believe that he is the great I am. I don't care. I could preach 24/7, 365 days out of the year. You have to choose to believe in the word that God is speaking into your life. That's why the word works for some and it doesn't work for others, because some choose to believe it and for others they choose not to believe it. You have to choose whether or not God is real in your life. God does not make you do anything. Why? Because if God made you do it, you resent him. If God made you do it grudgingly. If God made you do it, but you wouldn't be happy about it. Again, God says in verse 15 of Deuteronomy, chapter 30, he says, see, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. I pray we hear what the Spirit of the Lord is saying here, because God is saying, I've put in front of you life and death. I've set before you what's good for you, and I've also set before you what's not so good for you. God says, I put before you two doors. One door leads to life. The other one leads to death. God says, I put before you two doors. One door leads to good, and the other door leads to evil. God says, but it's up to you to choose which door you're going to walk through. And so that leads us to some things we got to address when it comes to our choices. I pray you write these down, because I believe you can go back and refer to these, because we've got to know these things about our choices and why our choices matter. Here's the first thing. Your choices say a lot about who you are. Let me say that again. Your choices say a lot about who you are. Your choices have a way of revealing what kind of person you are. Insecure people make insecure choices. Insecure people make insecure choices. People with a lack of confidence, they will flip and flop before they make a decision, because people with a lack of confidence don't have confidence in their choices. You can tell the difference between people that aren't afraid to make choices and make decisions and those that are, because those that make decisions, whether it's a bad decision or not, they are willing to say, you know what, I made that decision. I made that choice. See, they're willing to own up to those choices that they make, because those that are secure, no matter, even if it's a bad decision, they say, you know what, I didn't get this one right, but I'll get it right the next time. See, you've got to be willing to understand that your choices say a lot about who you are. Here's the second key, the second matter that we got to know about our choices, and that is your choices have a way of revealing what you truly believe. Your choices have a way of revealing what you truly believe. Go with me to Matthew 15, verse number 8. God says, I'll know who you really are, and I'll know what you really believe by your choices. Matthew 15, verse 8 says, these people draw near to me with their mouth. This is Jesus speaking. And honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. There are a lot of people that talk like they love God, but their choices don't match what they say. There are a lot of people that talk about God and they refer to God. They know of God, but they really don't know God. Jesus says that's what's called lip service. In other words, I see your mouth moving, but when I look at the decisions that you make, what you say doesn't match what you're doing in your life. Your choices say something totally different than what your mouth is saying. God says you can love me all you want. You can say you love me all you want, but I look at your choices to determine if that love is true and if that love is real. Because your choices truly reveal who you really are and what you really believe. Go back to Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, because we can't miss something here. It's very important. God says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you. Don't miss this. Look at what he says here. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you. Understand something. We're all going to have to stand before the judgment seat. Let me come over here. All of us are going to have to give an account for our life. I'm going to come over here. Okay. I don't care who you are. When we get to heaven, we're all going to stand before God's judgment seat and give an account for what we did in this life we were given. Let me try this in the middle. God is going to judge you, and you're going to have to give an account for how you lived your life when you stand before his judgment seat. And we're all going to have to give an account. And because we're all going to have to give an account, God says, when I get you in front of my judgment seat, I got some witnesses. God says, when I call you in front of the judgment seat, I've got some folks that are going to testify against you. God said, I got heaven and I got earth that are going to testify as to whether or not you truly believed in me. I got heaven and earth that's going to be called against you as witnesses to determine if you really are who you say you are. And if you love me like you really say you love me. Because your choices reveal what you truly believe. Here's the third key we got to know about our choices, and probably the one that many of us need to deal with the most, is you have to own up to your choices. Say that again. You have to own up to your choices. No one, absolutely no one, can control your choices but you. Say it again. No one can control your choices but you. God can't even control your choices. He can influence your choices, but he can't control what you choose. And people of God, please hear this. If you don't hear anything else today, please hear this. Too often, we as people of God, we do this, and we got to stop that. We got to stop blaming the devil for our poor choices. I think that needs to be said again. We got to stop blaming the devil for our poor choices. It's become too easy for us to defer to the devil and why we are where we are in our life. And God is saying it's too easy to blame him and excuse him for the bad choices we've made in our lives. The enemy can only do what God does. The enemy can only present you an opportunity. That's what temptation is. All temptation is an opportunity to do something. You have to choose whether or not you're going to do it. All the enemy did with Eve was presented her with an opportunity. And then he said, if you eat of this fruit of this tree, surely you will not die. She made a choice. And then she took that same opportunity to her husband, Adam. And she said, I tried this. Now I want to see if you want to try it. And he had to make the same choice. And yet when he got before God and God asked him, where are you? God wasn't asking him where he was physically. He was asking him, where are you spiritually? Because he already knew that Adam had sinned against him. He already knew that Adam had did something he was told not to do. And when Adam began to have to explain himself, the first thing he did was blame this woman you gave me. Instead of owning up to his choice, Adam wanted to blame somebody else. And too often we want to blame the man. We want to blame the government. We want to blame how I was raised. We want to blame daddy wasn't with me. We want to blame mama didn't console me. We want to blame everybody instead of looking ourselves in the mirror and saying, you know what? I've been making some bad choices in my life. Somebody say choices. Sooner or later, it's got to stop being everybody else's fault. And you got to start owning up to your choices. I understand this ain't going to be one of the messages that's going to get a whole lot of high fives, but that's all right. Because you can never get where you're going in God if you're going to keep blaming everybody else for your poor choices. You will never change unless you start changing some of your choices. And in order to change your choices, you got to start examining whether or not those choices are the right ones. Which leads us to some advice that we're going to give you today, and whether you take it is up to you. We're only going to offer the advice, but we pray that you take the advice and apply it in your life. Here's the first one. A, never, ever make a hasty choice. Never make a hasty choice. What is a hasty choice? A hasty choice is a choice made in the moment. You know, when y'all go into these big grocery stores and big box stores, they have mastered the art of moving people to make hasty choices. That's the whole point of those end caps at the end of every aisle. They design certain products and certain packaging to appeal to you so that you will make a hasty choice. They have mastered getting people to buy products in a moment instead of considering whether or not they really need that product right now. And they're a hasty choice, catch this, is a choice made with little to no consideration for the consequences of that choice. Sales and marketing gurus, they use certain code languages and techniques to get you to make hasty choices. We've heard these. Get it now while supplies last. Help me out, somebody. Sale ends today. And so when you see those things, you begin to feel hasty and you begin to feel anxious because they want you to make a hasty choice. Never, ever make a hasty choice. Always look at the short-term and long-term ramifications of your decisions. Just because it's good in that moment doesn't mean it's good for you. Just because it's good in that moment don't mean it's good for you. Just because it sounds good right now don't mean that it's going to be good for you in your future. Here's the next piece of advice that God wants to share with us today, and that is never ever make an emotional choice. Why? Because your emotions are temporary. You're mad today, but you're happy tomorrow. You're frustrated the next day, but you got joy the following day. Never, ever make an emotional choice because your emotions always change. And because your emotions change, you should never, ever make a long-term decision or a long-term choice on a short-term emotion. You hot mad today, so you want to end it all. And then 3, 4, 5 months down the road, you regret your decision. Never, ever make an emotional choice. You know, whenever you go on a car sales lot, now I'm not begrudging car salesmen, but just understand this is how they operate. Car lots and car salesmen, they appeal to your emotions. All right, let's do it this way. When they see you come on the lot, especially if there's a couple, they're looking for the emotional shopper, not the thinking shopper. They're looking for the one that's enamored with the color. Oh, that car look good. They're looking for the one that likes the interior. They're looking for the one that's all excited about the technology. That's why I don't go on car lots, because when I see the technology, I get all excited. They want you to get excited about the color, the features. They want you to get excited about the technology because that appeals to your emotions. The sole purpose for getting you in that car for a test drive is to get you emotional about the car. I like the way this thing rides. Ooh, when we went over the tracks, I barely felt it. They want you to get all caught up with the emotion of the experience so that you can make an emotional choice. What they don't like is the smart consumer. The one that doesn't care about the color, but the one that's asking, how much did you pay for this car? The one that's asking, how long has this car sat on the lot? The one that's asking, if I finance this, what kind of terms are we looking at? They don't want the smart consumer. They want the emotional consumer. Because emotional choices are ones that you tend to regret. So don't make an emotional choice. And then here's the next piece of advice that we want to share with you. C, never ever make a choice based on someone else's choice. Said again, never ever make a choice based on someone else's choice. That is to say, never ever choose to do something because your friends are doing it. Just because it's good for the goose don't mean it's good for the gander. Just because it's working for them don't mean it's going to work for you. Just because they like it don't mean you're going to like it. And, your friends and people around you will have you thinking their grass is greener. And then you start not liking your stuff. But how you know they ain't at night spraying their grass green when it's really brown? You better be careful about making choices based on someone else's choices. You got to do what's right for you. Let's see this in the text. Go with me to Joshua, the book of Joshua. Chapter 24, Joshua is now nearing the end of his leadership of God's people. Joshua is days away from about to die. He's done all that God has told him to do. He's been faithful. He's been committed to the work of God. And I want you to see what he says to the people in his final address to the people of God. Joshua 24. Let's look at verse 15. Watch what he says here. Look at this. This is Joshua talking to God's people. Catch this. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose, there go that word choice, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. Whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. Watch this. The leader of God's people, y'all, are speaking to them, and he's telling them, if you think it's evil to serve God, then go serve somebody else. He's saying if serving God is going to be an issue for you, then choose to serve something else. But I like what he goes on to say. He says, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, I like this, we will serve the Lord. I hear Joshua saying, I don't know about you, but I know what my choice is, and I choose to serve God. I don't know about you, but I know what God has done in my life, and I'm going to make the choice to serve God each and every day of my life. And I believe there are some Joshuas in here right now that you are a place in your life where you're saying, I don't care what anybody else does. I'm going to get myself up on Sunday morning and get myself into God's house so that I can worship him. I don't know about you. You can sleep in if you want to, but I know God's been too good to me, and I've got to get up and give God the praise. If I can fight rain to get to work, I can fight rain to give God some praise. If I can trudge through snow to get to work, I can trudge through snow and lift up my hands and give God glory. I don't know about my friends. My friends can do what they want to do, but I know what's good for me, and what's good for me is serving my God. Joshua said, it's up to you what you do. But I've made my choice, and I choose God. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So never ever make a hasty choice. Never make an emotional choice. Never ever make a choice based on somebody else's choice. And then D, here's the last piece of advice. Never ever make a choice without God. Never ever. If you believe in God, don't make a choice without God. We know this text. We hear it all the time. But go to Proverbs 3, verse 5. Proverbs 3, verse 5. Too often, y'all, although we know God, we make choices without him. Proverbs 3, verse 5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Why is that important? Why should you not lean on your own understanding? Because we have limited understanding. We think we know stuff, but God's ways aren't our ways. His thoughts aren't our thoughts. And there's some stuff that God wants to do in your life, but you keep making choices based on your understanding instead of trusting in his understanding. Verse 6 says, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. With God, you will always make the right choice. But without God, it's a crapshoot. With God, you always will go in the right direction. Without God, you'll be flailing in the wind. With God, you can avoid many of the pitfalls of life. Without God, you'll find yourself in the pit all the time. But you know what's interesting about God's people, Tessia, we will leave God out of the decision, but then want God to fix our bad choice. Am I the only one that's ever done that? I didn't consult with God, but then when I made my choice and got in trouble, I want God to fix the mess I made from my choice. And God is saying, if you would have just consulted with me before you made that decision, you may not have gone through some of the stuff you're going through. And God is trying to get us to a place where we stop making choices without seeking him first. And maybe you will have to wait a little bit longer. But God says if you just wait a little bit longer, it'll be worth the wait. Too many of us, we're picking spouses that God didn't pick for us, and then we're catching hell in our households, and we're wondering why things aren't working out, because you made a choice without God. he know how to talk to me. It feel good, all tingly down my arm every time he come by me. That don't mean he the right choice. And that don't mean God chose him for you. You know, she can cook. You know, she do look good in that dress. But that don't mean she's the choice God has for you. The Bible says that he that finds a wife finds a good thing. But just because you find it don't mean that that's the right choice. You got to wait and make sure God presents her to you. And if he presents her to you, then that's the one you should choose for your life. We got to make some better choices, y'all. Let's go back to Deuteronomy 30, verse 19. God said, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. Hear what God is saying. I have put in front of you life and death. I put before you blessing and cursing. He says, I put those before you, and I'm sitting in heaven hoping you make the right choice. God says, I put before you myself and the devil. Which one you going to choose? I put before you good, and I put before you bad. Which one you going to choose? I put before you blessing, and I put before you cursing. I'm waiting to see which choice you're going to make. I can't make it for you. I can only hope and pray that you make the right choice. And God says, when you make the right choice, surely goodness and mercy will follow you all the days of your life. When you make the right choice, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, because God, the choice that I made, is right there with me. When I make the right choice, even in a fiery furnace, God says, I'll step in with the furnace with you. Because you chose me, I'll never let the furnace burn you up. God says, when you make the right choice, I show up when you get in trouble. When you make the right choice, I'm there for you to console you when you're feeling down and sad. God says when you make the right choice and family leaves you and you're laying there in a hospital bed, the right choice shows up and comforts you when there's nobody else in the room and says, baby, I got you. Everything's going to be all right. When you make the right choice, God says, I don't care how bad your finances look right now. I'm still Jehovah Jireh. I still will provide for you. When you make the right choice, it'll be reflected in how things go in your life. But then he leaves us with a little piece of extra advice in this text. He says, you've got a choice, life, death. You've got a choice, blessing and cursing. Please choose life. But here's the added piece of advice. He goes on to say that both you and your descendants may live. Don't just make the right choice for yourself. Make the right choice and it can affect your children. Make the right choice and your children's children will be covered. When you make the right choice, it's a generational blessing. When you make the wrong choice, it's a generational curse. When you make the right choice, God says. That's why some of our kids can't understand why they catching hell. Where the God says, the sins of the father are sometimes paid by the children. So you got to be careful about your choices because they affect your children. That's why God says choose life. And I don't know about you, but I made my choice. I choose God. Every day, y'all, understand this. Every day, you got to make that choice. Every day, you got to wake up with your mind saying, you know what, God, I choose you today. Understand something. God chose you today. You ought to choose God. He chose you to wake up this morning, so you ought to choose to say, God, if you're giving me another day, then I choose to serve you. God, if you give me another day, then I choose to reverence you. God, if you're going to choose me, God, then I'm going to choose you. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19, closing. He says, I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I've set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live. I got a cousin that 99% of the time, Lisa, 99% of the time when you talk to him and you ask him how he's doing, his response is going to be, man, I'm just going through. 99% of the time, that's going to be his response. How you doing, man? I'm just going through. And so after he says he's going through, not too long after that, he will then commence to maybe asking for some help. Bro, you got a few dollars you can help me with, cuz? Or can you help me out? It's a little tight. And one time we was having a conversation, and as normal, I said, man, how you doing, man? I'm just going through. Just wonder if you could maybe help me out. I said, before I knew it, Deaconess Farm, before I could catch myself, man of God, before I even realized that my mouth got to moving, and I began to tell him, bro, you got to start making some better choices. Maybe you're in the condition that you're in because every time you get a job, 6 months later, you quit. But because you've chosen to quit and things get tight financially, now you need financial help. Maybe you got to start making some better choices. And stop blaming the man, and maybe you got to start looking at the man in the mirror and the choices that man in the mirror is making. Stop telling God what's wrong in your life and maybe look at some of the choices that you're making, and maybe you'll find that it's your choices and not God that's the problem. We'll tell God, I'm believing God to lose some weight, but you keep making bad choices. While you're telling God and telling others you're believing to lose weight, but you got a triple burger in your hand with cheese on it, and you got a milkshake in the other hand, and you got a Twinkie for dessert. You can't lose weight if you keep making the same bad choices. Sooner or later, you got to change your choices so that you can see change in your life. And some of us can't get delivered because we keep making the same choices. And here's what God will do. God will sit in heaven, and he's sitting in heaven saying, I'm waiting on my son to choose life. I'm sitting in heaven watching my daughter make the same mistakes. And I'm waiting her to stop making the same choices and make the right choices. And when she makes the right choice, her life will turn around. God said, but I can't do it for you. I can only hope that you make the right choice. So I encourage you today, just like God did in his word, choose life. Choices. Let's give God some praise. Amen.